Hi. Hello, hello. Sorry, it's taking a few minutes. I'm admitting everyone in out of the waiting room. Rabbi Rosenbaum, how are you?
It's recording. So we turn off our camera.
All right, good afternoon. Welcome. This is University School, beginning our first of 3 weeks of exploring faith and COVID-19 and how different faith groups are handling high holidays. And we're a school that explores religion and explores faith and visits houses of worship to hear from practitioners. And this year already, we've been to Christ Church Anglican and the Hindu Temple and Royal Missionary Baptist Church and the Creche Festival at Mepkin Abbey. And today we're here with one of our longtime friends, Rabbi Rosenbaum from Synagogue Emmanuel, who's been here. He's even taught some very basic Hebrew to our students before. And we really appreciate his coming to talk about faith life under the coronavirus and Passover, which was just recently. And we're really grateful for his being here today. I'm gonna turn it over to you. Thank you, Rabbi Rosenbaum.
All right. Thanks, Jason. I really appreciate it. And really, I'm just going to offer some sort of assorted thoughts about what it's been like for my synagogue community to deal with this and what kind of challenges we've been facing and how we're just sort of addressing everything. Obviously, these are incredibly challenging times that we're in, and I give everyone credit. I have 3 children of my own. One of them attends Creche Academy in Somerville, and the other 2 attend Addlestone Hebrew Academy in West Ashley, and they're all doing the distance learning themselves. So, I know it's not easy. It's not easy on the kids. It's not easy on parents. It's not easy on teachers. I mean, there's just a lot that we're having to deal with. So I give everybody credit. I give everyone credit to doing what we can. So I guess one thing I want to touch upon is the way we wound up making certain decisions as far as what we should do ritually, because ritual, and I think this is something that is sort of a universalist idea. Ritual brings order to chaos. We find that even we find it in happy times, we find that in sad times and challenging times. By doing certain rituals, we wind up putting ourselves together when the rest of the world may be swirling around us in ways we can't control. And I say that it also has to do with happy times too. I mean, even during joyous moments in our lives, sometimes we don't know what to do with that joy. We don't know how to appreciate it. We don't know how to put it into context. And by doing certain rituals, this is the case whether you be religious or not, doing certain, taking certain actions, all of those things help a great deal to put how we're feeling into context. So the challenge for us during this time is to still provide rituals for everybody at a time when A, our congregants need it, and B, when we can't physically gather. How do we maintain those rituals? Now, one of the biggest challenges with this is that there are certain rituals in Judaism which are not supposed to take place unless you have a certain number of Jewish adults present in the room. So the most prominent example of this has to do with what we call a minyan. I know a minyan, you think of those little yellow creatures that talk very entertainingly in those movies. This is a different kind of minyan. A minyan is essentially a quorum of 10 Jewish adults that gather together, and that having 10 people who fit that criteria, that is the minimal amount that you need in order to do certain things in communal prayer. You can pray anytime, but there are certain prayers that are reserved for when we're all gathered together. One of the most prominent prayers that is reserved for that is something called the Creche. The Creche is a prayer that is recited by people who have either recently lost a loved one, or it's the anniversary of the death of a loved one. And this is a major motivator for some people to come to synagogue, even if they don't come that often during the year. If they're in mourning, or if they are, if it's the anniversary of the death of a loved one, they come oftentimes to services so that they can say the Kaddish. So now we have this circumstance where we are physically separated, or we have to be physically separated. And what do you do? So there are a couple of different challenges with all this. You could say to yourself, well, you know what? It's more important that we gather for a short period of time, even if we're in defiance of the directive to stay physically apart. It's more important to provide that, and that, you know, and I respect that kind of argument. The reason why we didn't find that okay is because there's another Jewish principle which is very important, which is known as pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh essentially means saving a life. It's not a literal translation, but that's basically what it means. And the essential thing to know is that almost every commandment in Judaism you are allowed to break if saving a life is at stake. You're allowed to break almost every, I think there are 3 that you still shouldn't break, right? But in other words, you know, if you were in a circumstance where you couldn't have kosher food, but you needed to have non-kosher food in order to survive, you eat the non-kosher food because we have to embrace life. There are many people who observe certain rules of the Sabbath in which, you know, in which we're not supposed to do work. If there's a medical emergency, you break those rules for the sake of saving a life. So when it came to this question of, oh, you know, can we gather for prayer and what have you? You can't. You really can't have a gathering like that, because saving a life is you know, that supersedes everything, just about everything. So that is one way we haven't been able to do that. Now, we have used this miraculous program called Zoom in order to provide people still with some semblance of gathering. Almost every morning, I basically lead a service, a prayer service. I don't include all the prayers in it because, again, we don't have 10 Jewish adults present in a room. We don't have a minyan, as we say. So I don't say all the prayers, but I say what I can. And there are some people who say, you know, that's not really enough for me. I wish we could have done it otherwise. Okay, you know, you're not going to get everybody to agree with every decision. But there are some people for whom it's meaningful to just be able to just to see each other, even if it's on a screen. And and to be saying the same words at the same time. It can be very meaningful. So that's one way that we try to navigate all of that. Like I said, the idea of saving a life really supersedes pretty much everything. So because of that, we feel it's really important to keep things on, to endorse really everything everything that's suggested in order to maintain safety. Part of what's challenging is that is how we're going to be dealing with upcoming days when certain things are about to be relaxed in South Carolina. Just because the governor wants to relax them doesn't mean we necessarily have to take him up on that. Right? I mean, I think that just because something is allowed, I think we'll all agree, just because something is allowed doesn't mean you should necessarily do it. Okay? So the example that I love to give is one that was taught to me by that a rabbi I knew when I was in rabbinical school, which he said, if you want to sit on your couch all day and eat kosher ice cream nonstop, there's very little in Judaism that would tell you to not do that. You could do that, and you'd probably like to, right? But just because it's allowed doesn't mean that that's really what you should be doing, right? Yeah, have a couple of scoops, but in other words, try to make sure things are moderate, and so that has to. So I think that that idea applies even with the idea of opening things up. Just because things are opening up doesn't mean that we necessarily have to partake in all of them. All right, you can make your own decisions as best you can, but just because it's allowed doesn't mean you have to do it. So that's an important distinction to make. So another thing I want to touch upon was we just had a major holiday known as Passover. And with Passover, there are a number of things that take place. First of all, we're supposed to avoid eating or even owning in our homes any leavened products, right? Anything that has yeast in it, anything that like foods that rise up, right? We're not supposed to have those in our possession during this time. The major reason is that when our Israelite ancestors left Egypt, they had to go in a hurry. And since they were in a hurry, everyone who was baking their bread for the day literally had to just grab what they had and go. And the bread didn't have time to rise. And so you had this, so in other words, you had this very flat bread that is known as matzah. And so the rule is that you're supposed to eat matzah on Passover and not bread. And then, but any kind of bread products you're not supposed to have either. You're supposed to use matzah in order to do that, which makes for sort of a complicated time. You spend a lot of time cleaning your home, making sure that there isn't any of those leavened products around. You're supposed to get different food, and that food, because there is such a demand for a specific period of time, that food can be very expensive and not easy to find in stores. So there's been there, and so it takes a lot of preparation to get ready for Passover. And it is, and it's not easy in a normal year. Well, now you add this part to it. How do you deal with it? So what was very good is that, the central organization that my synagogue belongs to, United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and also the Rabbinical Assembly, which is the union of rabbis that I'm a part of. They came together and they said, okay, how can we still honor Jewish law? How can we still observe Passover in a legitimate way while trying to make things as easy as possible for just the typical Jew who doesn't necessarily have access to everything, and who will be going to the grocery store here and there, if at all. It's like I said, it's challenging enough to get everything, all the ingredients together to have your home kosher for Passover over the course of those 8 days. All right, now you take away the ability to move about freely. Well, I mean, it becomes so much harder then. So the nice thing is that there were certain leniencies that were allowed. One of the leniencies that was allowed has to do with the major feast of Passover, which it takes place each of the first 2 nights of the holiday, and those feasts are known as a Seder. A Passover Seder is basically a ritual meal in which we say numerous blessings, we eat certain foods that are appropriate for the holiday, and we tell the story of the Exodus, and we talk about what it means to us today. And so one of the things they said was, all right, listen, if you can't, you're supposed to, in a normal year, you're supposed to invite as many people as you can to your Passover Seder, because the idea is that everyone should be able to partake. Every Jew, any non-Jew who's interested, anyone who wants a place to go for a Passover Seder should have a place to go. Okay, well, during this year, when we're not supposed to be really having house guests, right? We couldn't really do that. So they made it possible to essentially say you can do Seders over Zoom or FaceTime or those sorts of things. So I had one of the most surreal Passover Seders in my home, in which I had my children with me, in my home itself. But then on Zoom, we had members of my family spread out over each of the 4 time zones of the United States. They all chimed in and were part of our Passover Seder from afar, and all participated in their own way. So it was a pretty, in a sense, so when you talk about a silver lining, this is the first time I was able to have a Passover Seder with so much of my family at one time, since honestly, I don't remember the last time I was able to have that. So it was really a neat opportunity to do that. So that's, as far as Passover is concerned, we could talk a little bit more about that and, questions and answers as far as that's concerned. Another thing I should mention is how to observe another important day, which we just concluded. This is Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day. Holocaust Remembrance Day is obviously very important, and it's going to become more and more important in the years to come. Remembering the Holocaust, remembering the events that led up to and included the slaughter of 6 million Jews, as well as numerous other innocent victims in Europe by the Nazi regime. That is, it is not only, I often refer to it as humanity's worst moment. And it also is something that was rigorously documented by Nazi authorities. They were very much proud of what they did. And there were numerous people who did somehow survive the Holocaust, and they were able to lead productive lives in society after that time. Well, the Holocaust took place in the years leading up to and including World War II. So, as you probably are aware, I mean, World War II ended in 1945. There are fewer and fewer Holocaust survivors who are living, and who are living and able and willing to tell their stories. There are still some out there, and there are still a few in Charleston, but it's not going to be very long until all the people who survived the Holocaust will pass away. And when that moment comes, it is the responsibility of everyone to continue telling this story, because we often say the phrase "never again." And unfortunately, we know that there is still horrendous bigotry and genocide that have taken place in other countries since then. And we know that anti-Semitism has not gone away. The anti-Semitic acts over the last 3 years have increased in America by 97%. And as many people that we have who are tolerant and loving people, there is still there are still many cruel and intolerant elements of modern society. So we're not so telling this story of what led to the persecution of Jews and other minorities and the dastardly, horrible things that happened becomes even more important as our first-hand witnesses are beginning to pass away. So one of the important things we do is we try to gather as a Jewish community, indeed as a full Charleston community, once a year at the Holocaust Remembrance Day observance. Well, we couldn't do that. We couldn't gather physically. So there were more than 300 logins to the Holocaust Remembrance ceremony on Zoom this past Sunday afternoon. The reason why there weren't more is apparently because I think they hit their limit, the Zoom limit of 300. And there were other people who wanted to come in who were not able to. Obviously, being able to gather together for a ceremony like that is certainly a lot more powerful when you can do it with people literally at your side. It's not, it was obviously an imperfect solution, but what I'm very glad is that it was very well organized, and they found ways to remind people of stories, and then also to create rituals rituals of remembrance, of lighting special candles to keep as general reminders. There were just numerous speeches by different people involved in the Jewish community, as well as a reading of names of people of people's relatives who passed away in the Holocaust. So, we did what we could with it. I guess the last thing I just want to mention with all this is the idea that in a sense, our reliance on technology that we have had to do over these last few weeks, and we're going to continue to do, I imagine, over the next few weeks at least, is it really is part of this idea that we're forwarding in my synagogue, which is socially distant but spiritually connected. In many ways, there have been more and more people who have participated in these kinds of gatherings before this pandemic arrived. There have been people who began to utilize this tool as people are more and more spread out, and people are more and more attached to their different devices and their and just in different high tech tools. And we're just going to need to, and I think this time is proving that we need to continually do that even after this hopefully passes, we have to do this. We're going to have to, utilize these tools as much as we can. There is a Jewish phrase or a quote by a famous rabbi, which is that the old shall become new and the new shall become holy. So one of the reasons why Judaism has been able to remain for so many thousands of years is its consistent ability to adapt to new circumstances. And I think in a way we are faced with this challenge right now as a society. We have to adapt. And even though it's going to feel different, even though it's going to feel strange at times and not necessarily what we want, it's still someplace we need to be. And I'm confident that Jewish communities, and indeed all communities, if they have enough optimism and wherewithal to do the work for it, I think we can still maintain a sense of community even through these difficult times. So those are some assorted thoughts coming from a rabbi in West Ashley, and I hope that I hope that I hope to answer some questions. I guess one final thing I should just mention is Jason, I don't know if you knew this, that actually I am come July I'm actually moving to Buffalo, New York. I'm going to become the rabbi of a synagogue there, and so this may be the last time I get a chance to talk to students and teachers at university school, and I just want to say that I've really appreciated the opportunities to do so. I know my synagogue has hired a rabbi to come beginning July, a rabbi named Evan Ravsky, who's a really lovely guy, and certainly I'm happy to pass on his contact information so that hopefully you can make a connection with him, because I'm sure that he'll want to be an ambassador to the community as well. So so I just wanted to share my appreciation for the opportunities and the kindness that has always been shown to me.
Oh, Rabbi Rosenbaum, that's exciting and bittersweet. So I'm a huge fan of yours and have enjoyed all of our time together. It's been like a decade. It's been a long time that we've been together. And I wish you and your family well. And when you get there, to hear change in the midst of this, to be brave, because that's what we're all doing, like you just said, with your faith is getting acclimated to different circumstances, and you can do it, and we can all do it. So we wish you well, but we will miss you.
Thanks. And like I said, I've enjoyed it. So, and I won't be, I will be findable online. I will be findable. So we'll see.
We've got good roots in upstate New York. We've got some people who hang there, so we'll have to come see you.
Terrific.
I'm going to open the floor. So what you would have to do is you would have to, either press the participants hand raising thing and let me call on you, and let's do that. So time to come on and give me some questions for Rabbi Rosenbaum. There's lots of good ones out there.
The first one's always the toughest.
It is the toughest. All right, upper school, lead the way. Or teachers, or it might be me. Oh, here's Cadence. Here we go. All right, Cadence, you're up.
Hi. Do you get like more participants in like faith during this time because it's like people are going through like hard times? Or do you get less because there's less community since you're not actually able to gather together?
It's an excellent question. I think it's a little bit of both. I think that there have been certain programs we've done that we've gotten an increase in participation. For instance, my synagogue's semi-annual congregational meeting, I think had a bigger crowd this time because, people didn't have to leave their homes. People didn't have to make their way to the synagogue. And, and they could have, and they could have done so without, if they, if they wanted, they could, participate in their pajamas or hopefully they were all wearing pants, but there's no way to know. But so in that sense, some of those things have, have increased. Another thing is so Friday night is the beginning of the Jewish Sabbath, and usually Friday night services are not very well attended. We've actually gotten an increase in Friday, on our Friday. Well, it's before the sun sets, so it's not technically Friday night, but it's sort of our Friday gathering, and that's actually been an increase as well. Certain things, however, have gone, have decreased as far as participation is concerned. So I think the daily prayers, it hasn't been as much because we haven't been able to do as many of them. So that's certainly gone down a little bit. And also, I think there are people who have tried to, because for a lot of people, this time can be very, they can be very redundant. Things can kind of blend in one to another. Sometimes it's challenging to remember what day it is, honestly. I don't know if you're experiencing that as well. But I would say also that so there are people who said, "Oh shoot, yeah, I forgot. I was supposed to go into there, but I was doing something else around the house, and then I forgot." So I think it sometimes it makes a difference to have a place where you say, "Okay, I need to get up and go, and I need to get in my car, or I need to walk, or I need to what have you." When it's all when everything's happening within your home, well, you get sidetracked for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden you've missed it. So that I think is we've fallen victim to that a little bit as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Jack Wheeler, you're up next.
Hey, how are you?
All right.
So I guess more historically, I guess, when it comes to like the Catholic Church, sometimes they sought for more, I guess, monetary benefits at sometimes, which is like why the Protestant Reformation happened or whatever. But was there ever a time in Judaism where I guess there's a bit of a sort of corruption, I guess, or with I guess, yeah, corruption or one sort of monetary benefit, kind of took advantage of the believers or whatever?
Yeah, here's what I would generally say is that every religious group, or I would say pretty much every religious group, have had people in power or who've sought power who have been, fallible to corruption here and there. So in Judaism, Judaism is not an exception to that. There was a time when the temple stood in Jerusalem, the second temple specifically, where there were people who kind of, they bought their way into the priesthood. The priesthood in Judaism during the time of the temple was something that was supposed to be hereditary. As it turned out, people were sometimes bribing their way into those powerful positions. There are, for instance, you can look at, there have been many prominent businessmen, certainly in modern times, who've been Jewish. Have all of them been on the up and up? No. Have a lot of them been on the up and up? Of course. Look, I think every time you're dealing with power, you have to manage egos, you have to manage the temptation to be corrupt, to try to, the temptation to compromise ideals for the sake of your own personal benefit. I think that, and Judaism is no stranger to that. It certainly has happened. It's not what we believe should happen. And it's something that it continues to be the responsibility of Jewish leaders to speak out against any kinds of corruption.
Thank you, Jack. Next up, Kessler.
Hi, Rabbis and Mom. Thank you so much for doing this. So I had a question about, so organized religion is obviously going down in America, and so it's really hard for houses of worship to raise money and keep funds up to do all the things they want to do. And obviously, I feel like quarantine is making that harder, because if you're not at your house of worship, you're not, the basket isn't being passed around, the message isn't being given that it's time to give. So has your fundraising gone up or down during this time of self-quarantine?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. We're definitely looking at our finances pretty hard at our synagogue. I think one thing to keep in mind is that while fundraising has not necessarily been impacted yet, I think a lot of people are waiting for the other shoe to drop. They're waiting for, they're concerned that as people's financial security becomes more in question, they wonder whether people will look at donating to the synagogue as a luxury rather than a personal necessity. So that's something that we're keeping an eye out for. That we're not really seeing that drop yet, partially because since we're not gathering in our building, expenses for the building, some certain expenses have gone way down also, right? We're not, we usually have a nice spread of food every after services every Saturday. Well, we don't have to provide that when we don't have people there. We aren't, we don't have to, worry about heating or cooling the building, nearly as much without people there. So that's actually, helped us in a little bit, I guess. But we are going to be concerned about that. One thing I'm very glad about is that thus far, we have been, all of our employees continue to be paid. Now, we don't have that large of a staff, but we continue to pay our employees as well as our security guards. We're saying, you know what, we are going to, because you guys mean something to us, we want to make sure that we do that. We don't know how long we can keep that up. We're going to try. So that part's going to be a challenge. Yeah, fundraising is a challenging thing. You're right. Affiliation and organized religion is going down nationally, internationally, I think, as well. So we have to continue to find ways to make sure that we are reaching as many people who want to be reached, and to do so in a way that isn't overly reliant on funding, because the idea of we're all God's children, and it shouldn't matter how much money you have in in your wallet. That's a very important thing. With that said, of course, when you have professionals need to be paid. I mean, this is the way I earn my living. So I mean, I need to make sure that, and if you want to have a nice building to gather in, it costs money. So I mean, we want to keep the lights on, but so it's certainly something we're looking at.
All right, thanks, Kessler. Kit, your question's next.
Hi, thank you for coming. I actually have two questions, but earlier you mentioned the minyan, but what are some of the other big challenges you face as a rabbi to lead your Jewish community through these difficult times? And then my other question was, are there any other points in history that you sort of draw upon to make decisions about what to do during the COVID-19 pandemic?
So as far as other challenges are concerned, I mean, I think part of it is that, unless people log in, or unless, they reach out to me individually, or I reach out to them individually, there are people that I used to see all the time that I'm not seeing, that I'm not, and so whereas there are people who, would usually come to services or usually come to programs and things like that, and I could kind of count on, oh yeah, all right, I'm going to see you at this time or what have you. Well, now we have to make an extra effort to do that, and so that's a concern. Another concern. I'm actually in a couple hours going to be officiating at a funeral, unfortunately, and this is the third one since quarantine began that I'm doing, and apart from the obvious sadness of death, I'm going to be wearing a mask, and I've told the people, I've told the loved ones of the one who passed, I'm not going to shake your hand. I'm not going to give you a hug. I'm not going to offer a hug. I mean, those are, I mean, I read sometimes that we should get rid of the handshake, or we should get rid of hugging people. You know what? I understand that, safety is important, but, I think that for so many, I mean, we need as a species physical touch from time to time. And so, obviously, should we be more careful about it? Yeah, probably. But the idea of eliminating it, I don't want to live in a world where we're eliminating it. So that's so that's something that, I mean, because look, not everybody wants to be hugged in general, and that's fine. but sometimes when I offer it, they take me up on it, and it means something to them. So as far as other times in history, I mean, listen, I would say that to survive this long as a people, Judaism has undergone, the Jewish history is filled with countless challenges and countless moments of adversity. And so there's no doubt that there's no doubt that this is right now a major challenge. There's also this incredible survival instinct. During Passover, there's a phrase where we say that in every generation, there has been someone who has tried to rise up to destroy us. And I think that history has borne that out. Every generation has had somebody who says, I wish we could get rid of the Jews. There are people who say this now, right? And so dealing with adversity, I would say, is the norm for us. So the idea of trying to find ways to keep together and trying to adjust to what's happening. In a sense, it's even though the challenge has changed, the instinct for survival remains the same.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kit. Those were good questions. Will, Courtney, you're up.
Hey, thanks for doing this. But my question is that you gave the example of people coming together for the Holocaust Remembrance Zoom call, but what other examples have you seen of people coming together during this trying time?
Within my synagogue, I would say, another example has been that I know some people have been going to grocery stores for those who either they can't physically go in general, or they know that since they're part of the high risk group, people who are very much at risk of contracting the virus, they are people are doing grocery shopping for other people. So that's certainly been one way. I would say also, I'll refer back to the decision to make sure that employees continue to be paid. I mean, I think that's been, that was not something that we budgeted for as a congregation. We obviously didn't budget for this. We weren't expecting this. So the fact that people came together and said, this is part of what we should be doing as a community, I think that's another example.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Will. Pa, your question is next.
Hi, thanks for coming. I just wanted to ask, you talked about the finances of your synagogue, but what about, how do you think this outbreak will affect religion and houses of worship that won't be able to financially withstand the quarantine?
We are staring at the possibility of some really tough times ahead in general. And I think that that's the case with religious institutions. I think that's the case with almost everything. I know that there are efforts to make certain loans to different places in order to keep it afloat, and that's certainly going to help. But I think that as we head into what is almost certainly going to be a recession in the national and world economy, what's at the very least going to be a recession. There's no question that religious institutions are affected, and what you try to do is, the challenge is to balance the need to serve everyone with the realities of being able to sort of make ends meet. every house of worship is both a business and a family. All right, that is an important reality, and there are times where a house of worship has to make decisions based on the idea of family first, such as when we decided to make sure to continue paying employees. And there are times where you have to make decisions as a business because you can only, you can only do so much. I forget whether this was Benjamin Franklin or Mark Twain who said this, but he who lives on hope will die fasting. In other words, we could sit around and say, it's going to be okay, God will provide. It's going to be okay, God will provide. It's going to be okay, God will provide. At least the way that I understand God is God gives us tools to figure some things out on our own. And when the going gets tough, we don't simply say, all right, God, come on. We certainly reach out to God with hope, but we also, but just to sit around and just wait with our hands held out, that's not enough. We have to make things happen on our own as well. So I don't know what the future holds. I really don't. I think that the sliver of hope that I have is that there are going to be ways that we will use technology in order to cut down on certain expenses. I think that's definitely a possibility. And so we'll see where that leads.
Thank you, Pi. And our final question, and then we'll have a goodbye for you, Rabbi Rosenbaum, is from Charlie.
Is there anything we can do to support you in your synagogue?
Oh, that's really sweet. Listen, I think that, I think one thing is to, I will not be shy about saying that financial contributions obviously would help, what have you. I say that not expecting, not with any expectations, and not to make you feel bad if you can't. It's okay. We're all trying to figure things out. Obviously, one of the things that's going on with my synagogue, that this was a circumstance that was happening pre-pandemic, was that the entire kitchen has to be replaced. The kitchen of the synagogue was old, was not being well kept, and just for public safety has to be replaced, and that's a very expensive project. So that's that's something there. But obviously, it goes beyond that. I think, on a more sort of spiritual, idea, I think the more often that we can connect with people of different faiths, the more that we can show support for people who are different than we are. I think that's the way you can help the most. If all of you become citizens and advocates for diversity and for tolerance and acceptance, I think, because those ideas, that starts with all of you. I look at some of the anti-quarantine rallies that are taking place at different state capitals, and we can have debates about the best ways to reopen the American economy. We can have good and civil debates about this. But I don't think it, and you can say that, we need to relax certain things. There are arguments that can be made about that. It's not what have you. I personally think that we should be staying home as often as we can, but okay. I'm willing to hear other bits. Part of what's happening at some of these rallies is that some of the messages that are out there are very hateful. I know there was a photograph taken of at one of these rallies. Again, this was maybe just a couple people who did this, but there was a sign that said, the real threat is, and then they showed a picture of somebody with a Jewish star. Right, the real threat is the Jew. Right, this was at one of these rallies. That's not an opinion held by everybody at such rallies. This is not, I'm not saying that everybody believes this, but I think it is. So it's all of our responsibility to that during times of panic and times of crisis, it's important that we are not simply picking people to blame and then treat them horribly. That's the wrong thing to do. I guess I'll leave you with this sort of thought. If you've ever been to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., which if you haven't had the chance, it's, once we're able to travel again, I think it's tremendously important. But what I think was also really important, the most recent time I was there, was we went from the museum to the Lincoln Memorial. And the contrast could not have been more important, because Abraham Lincoln was somebody who took America's most divisive moment, the time of the Civil War, and he found ways to bring people together. Adolf Hitler took a moment of crisis in Germany, which, Germany was going through some very hard times before World War II. Hitler chose divisiveness. He chose hatred. He chose the path of blaming other people. He did the opposite of what Lincoln did. So, as simplistic as it sounds, be Lincolns. We should all be Lincolns.
Thanks, Charlie. Rabbi Rosenbaum, now knowing this is our last time catching up here in Charleston, I couldn't have asked for a better time for you to come and speak with us. And for the students and teachers here, we're exploring this piece about how did a faith community, and we're a community, how are they handling not being able to be together? But it's a reminder, we all love our teachers and subjects, L&L and field trips and math and science and history and languages and English, but matters of the heart and the wrestling with what kind of person you're going to be. This was a moment to stop and think about that stuff as well too. And wherever that comes from, again, comes from your family or family traditions or organizations you belong to or your faith, to make sense of the world and to figure out how to make your way forward. So sorry about that. Many thanks to you, Rabbi Rosenbaum, for over a decade of all the times that you've shared yourself with us. And I'm going to pause the recording so we can wave and say goodbye.